want to bring in former Assistant U.S. Attorney Andy McCarthy, because Byron was just explaining to us just the significance of President Biden saying that he would now be willing to do a one-time exception to the filibuster rule to codify Roe. And he said not just Roe, but he's trying to appeal, I think, broader on the issue of privacy. How does that square with what you know about his positions in the past?
Well, Dana, he's always been, certainly during his time in the Senate, he was very strongly against a reform of any kind of the filibuster. And, you know, the history of this is that when Democrats and progressives kind of let their id get in front of them and, you know, move off the filibuster for this or that thing, it tends to blow up on them in short order. So I think this is one of these things where it's very short-sighted to broach this. I hope it doesn't go anywhere, but people should understand there is no one-time break of the filibuster. As Senator McConnell has said any number of times, you know, the filibuster is an all-or-nothing proposition, and they're not going to selectively break it for one thing or another as the you know, as progressives go down their wish list. And if they open this Pandora's box, I think, you know, once again in short order they stand to get bit back by it.
Andy, the other thing here, part of this argument in the wake of the Dobbs ruling has already moved on to abortion medication, the so-called abortion pills. The Biden administration kind of across the board, at least in the cabinet, from the vice president to the Health and Human Services secretary to the attorney general, now says nothing in this ruling impacts women's access to abortion pills. Though we're going to make sure, they say, that they can still order these pills online, that they can still be mail delivered to women, I guess, across state lines, and that nothing in this most recent decision will impact that in any way. Obviously, conservatives are pushing back and saying that's not the case at all. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? How do you see this legal fight snaking through the courts now?
Yeah, Jillian, I think what's happening is there's kind of a clash of which aspect of our government has control over this aspect of health care and protection of life. So what the federal government will say is that the Constitution makes us supreme over interstate commerce. That's the constitutional doctrine by which we've been able to capture much of health care and regulate it. And in terms of moving products, including abortifacients, across state lines and getting them into the hands of people across state lines, regardless of what the state law is in those places, the federal government is going to say the Constitution makes us supreme in this regard. The pushback on the Federalist side is going to be that the constitutional system sets up dual sovereignty, where the states are supposed to be sovereign and supreme regarding the internal affairs of the states. And that has traditionally, and this is important because a lot of what's in the Dobbs decision is all about the traditions of the United States and how we've been governed, what the intention of the framers was at the time the Constitution was ratified. The idea was that the states were going to be supreme over things like security of the public, the safety of life, and even medical affairs within the state. So they would be allowed to make whatever regulations about abortion that they would choose to make. So you're going to have a clash between what the feds say is their constitutional authority and what the states say the Constitution makes them supreme to decide. And that ultimately may be something that the Supreme Court will have to grapple with.
That's so interesting, Andy, because of the Dobbs decision, would a law like this that President Biden is suggesting, would that even pass constitutional muster?
Well, it's a very interesting question, Dana, because I think the argument that we have made on the pro-life side and what we consider to be the constitutionalist conservative side is that this realm, the whole ambit of abortion, that the Supreme Court took away and basically usurped to itself in 1973 was at that point in time exclusively the subject of state regulation. So you had about 30 states that had complete bans on abortion, and then there was reform of the law in a number of other states. And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the time thought this was problematic, that Roe versus Wade was actually arresting that whole development, that evolution of the law in the states. So what we've been arguing for half a century is that the court should never have taken this away from the states, that it should have been left there for them to regulate, and that people would eventually, in the places where they live, have the abortion regime under the law that they were more comfortable with, rather than one imposed by a court in Washington. Now what they're talking about is having Washington impose a one-size-fits-all, but doing it through Congress rather than the courts. And I really don't think that's any better. And I doubt that, I think a lot of the Supreme Court's going to have a problem with that, too.
Right. Okay, Andy McCarthy, thank you. I know that you're here also because we have two big Supreme Court announcements and opinions that are going to come down in just about 15 to 20 minutes. So stick around for us. And